Everyone dreams of spending quality time with friends on a road trip or dream vacation. My wish finally came true last year when my friend Jake suggested that we should go on a little trip to California. But little did we know that our dream vacation would take an unexpected turn we'd never forget. I recently got back from a trip to California with two of my closest friends. I'm the youngest of my friends. I happen to be 22, while Emma and Jake are 2 years older than me. We'd planned a few days in Anaheim and booked an Airbnb in a quiet Santa Ana neighborhood, far enough from the crowds to relax, but still close to everything. When we arrived, the place seemed perfect. Modern decor, a cozy living room, and a small backyard shaded by citrus trees. It felt more like a home than a rental. The host, a man named Trevor, had left a note on the counter welcoming us and reminding us to keep all windows locked at night. That caught my attention. It seemed oddly specific, but I brushed it off, assuming it was just a safety precaution. That first night, we stayed up late watching movies and laughing about nothing in particular. Around midnight, we finally went to bed. I was just drifting off when I heard footsteps outside, slow, measured, crunching against gravel. I held my breath, waiting for them to fade, but they didn't. They stopped right beneath the window near my bed. I thought maybe it was a neighbor, but when I peeked through the blinds, there was no one. Just the faint glow of the street lamp over the yard. I told Emma and Jake about it the next morning, but they shrugged it off. Jake joked that maybe I'd heard a cat or the wind causing some objects to collide. I didn't argue. I didn't want to sound paranoid. The next day passed without issue. We went sightseeing, grabbed dinner downtown, and came home exhausted. But that night, the feeling of being watched crept back almost immediately. As we were locking up, I noticed something strange. One of the kitchen windows was slightly open. I was sure we'd closed it before leaving. It wasn't enough to climb through, but enough to let a draft in. I mentioned it to the others, and Jake laughed, saying I was overthinking it. I closed the window firmly and double-checked the lock. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up again. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then I heard it, the same slow crunch of footsteps on gravel. Only this time closer to the back door. I nudged Emma awake, whispering, "Someone's outside." We both froze as a soft tapping sound came from the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. It wasn't a knock, more like the tip of a finger brushing the glass repeatedly. We stared at the dark outline of the curtains, too scared to move. The tapping stopped after a few seconds, followed by the sound of something, or someone, retreating. We didn't sleep after that. In the morning, Jake found footprints in the dirt outside the sliding door. They weren't clear enough to make out, but the heel marks were deep. Someone had been standing there. We reported it to Trevor, the Airbnb host, who seemed unconcerned. He texted back, "Probably a gardener or maintenance guy. Nothing to worry about." The message didn't sit right with any of us. There were no gardens out back, no tools, no sign of maintenance work. We decided to stay one more night, mostly because it was too last minute to book anywhere else. We tried to laugh it off, to act normal, but it was quite obvious that we were all scared. We were just trying to hide how uneasy we felt. That evening, we ordered takeout and ate at the kitchen table. I remember glancing at the back door every few minutes, half expecting to see someone standing there. After dinner, Emma went upstairs to take a shower while Jake and I cleaned up. A few minutes later, she shouted for us to come up. Her voice was shaky and had an urgent note. When we got there, she pointed to the bathroom window. The frosted glass was slightly fogged from the shower, but at the bottom edge, pressed faintly against the glass, was a smudged mark. We ran outside immediately, flashlights in hand, but the yard was empty. The gate was closed, the fence untouched. Still, someone had to have been there, someone tall enough to reach the second-story window. That was the breaking point. We packed our stuff and decided to leave that night. As we loaded the car, I noticed something else that made me jump in fright. The lock on the side gate was damaged, as if it had been tampered with. There were scuff marks on the wood where it had been pried back. We didn't even bother checking the rest of the property. We just left. I drove while Jake kept looking over his shoulder, and Emma sat silently in the back seat, hugging her backpack like she was afraid to let go. We didn't stop until we reached a cheap motel off the highway, and even there, I kept checking the door every few minutes. We filed a report the next morning and sent everything, photos, messages, timestamps, to Airbnb support. The host didn't respond to our texts again. A week later, his listing disappeared from the app entirely. No response, no explanation. Months later, curiosity got the better of me, and I tried searching for the address again. It didn't come up under Airbnb, but I eventually found it listed under a different name on another rental platform. The profile picture was the same house, same furniture, but a new host, Travis, not Trevor. The reviews were minimal, but one stood out. A woman had written, "Loved the house but didn't feel safe at night. Someone tried the door while I was inside." Another guest mentioned that a man had shown up claiming to be a property inspector, asking strange questions about when they'd be checking out. That's when it clicked. It wasn't the house that was haunted, it was being watched. Maybe by the host, maybe by someone who knew the property's routine, who had access. Whoever it was, they'd been testing boundaries, starting with the windows, then the doors, then the stairs. If we hadn't left when we did, I don't know how far it would have gone. Even now, when I stay anywhere new, I check every window latch twice. I wedge a chair under the doorknob, no matter how nice the place looks or how friendly the host seems. Jake laughs about it, calls me paranoid, but he still does it too. Emma, on the other hand, refuses to use Airbnb at all. She says hotels feel safer because there's always someone awake at the front desk. What stays with me isn't what we saw, but what we didn't. Whoever was outside that window knew exactly how long to linger, how quiet to move, how to make us doubt ourselves. There's something more unsettling than anything supernatural. It's people who watch and wait from the dark. Every time I think about that handprint, I wonder how many nights he'd been out there before we even noticed, how many doors he'd tried, how many times he'd almost come inside. Ever stayed somewhere that feels like the house of your dreams, but after your first few weeks it starts feeling like a house from an 80s horror movie? That's what happened to me in a tiny cabin in Colorado. It started with the strange, unmistakable feeling that someone or something was watching me while I slept. What was supposed to be a peaceful solo getaway became a night I will never forget. Last year, I decided to take a solo road trip through the Rockies in Colorado with my dog, Max. I had booked a tiny cabin Airbnb tucked away in a forested area, and it looked perfect in the photos, quaint, cozy, and remote. When I finally pulled up to the property, though, something felt off. Max jumped out of the truck, and immediately he froze, his fur bristling. His eyes locked on the second-floor window, unblinking. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing, but the chill that ran down my spine told me otherwise. I carried my luggage inside, noticing how charming the first floor looked. The wooden beams and rustic furniture gave it a warm, inviting vibe. I even started to relax, thinking maybe I had been overreacting. Max sniffed around cautiously, still uneasy, but nothing out of the ordinary happened on the main level. It wasn't until I headed upstairs to the loft bedroom that the unease returned. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, and Max immediately refused to follow me up. He sat at the bottom of the stairs, growling softly. I tried to settle in but couldn't shake the tension. I decided to go out for dinner, hoping a little time away would calm both of us. When I returned, Max was frantic in his crate. He barked, scratched, and whined so desperately that I had to cover the crate with a sheet and put the fan on nearby to soothe him. Even then, he continued trembling, his body rigid and ears flattened. I've traveled with him countless times, and he's never reacted this way. Something in that cabin had deeply unsettled him. Eventually, I coaxed him up to the loft and tried to get us both to bed. Max stayed pinned in a tiny corner, refusing to come near me. That was strange. He usually slept pressed against my side. I lay down, shutting my eyes, hoping the discomfort was just my imagination. That was when I heard it, the faint creak of the floorboards downstairs. I froze, holding my breath. It came again, slow, deliberate steps. I told myself it was probably the wood settling, but then I heard what sounded unmistakably like a door hinge squeak. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the loft, the stairs, the small open living space below. Nothing moved. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I slid a chair under the doorknob before I got back into bed. Sleep never came. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of the wind outside felt amplified, as if the quiet was hiding something else. Max remained tense in the corner, occasionally letting out low growls. Around midnight, I heard the faintest scraping noise, like someone dragging a stick, or maybe a boot, along the side of the house. The sound stopped abruptly when I turned off my flashlight. That was enough for me. I decided I'd leave at first light. The next morning, the cabin looked deceptively peaceful. Sunlight poured through the windows, highlighting the cheerful decorations I'd admired the previous evening. But when I went outside to load my truck, my blood ran cold. There were footprints in the dirt by the kitchen window, fresh ones, deep and clear, circling the cabin like someone had been pacing there during the night. I checked the lock on the door twice, realizing just how flimsy it really was. Max barked furiously as I packed, his eyes never leaving the tree line. I loaded him into the truck and tried to calm my shaking hands as I turned the ignition. The road out of the property was narrow, winding through dense woods, and halfway down the hill, I noticed something in my rear-view mirror, a figure standing near the cabin's edge. I couldn't make out their face, but they were watching me leave. I drove until I reached a gas station 20 miles away, where I finally stopped to breathe. The attendant told me that a few cabins in that area had been reported for unauthorized visitors, locals occasionally wandering near rentals or observing travelers from a distance. The thought made me sick. The owner later confirmed that a previous guest had mentioned seeing a man lurking in the trees, but no one had ever caught him. That realization hit me harder than any ghost story ever could. I had spent an entire night sleeping in a cabin that someone might have been watching from the dark. Maybe he was waiting for me to fall asleep, maybe just curious, but the idea that another human being was out there, close enough to breathe against the walls, was far more terrifying than anything supernatural. I reported the incident to Airbnb and left a detailed review, though the host claimed to have installed new motion lights and cameras afterward. Still, I couldn't shake the image of those footprints circling the house, or the sound of slow steps moving just beyond the walls while Max growled at the stairs. For weeks after the trip, I found myself double-checking locks and sleeping with lights on. Even Max would perk up at small noises in the night, as if expecting that same quiet stalker to reappear. When I told friends about what happened, most brushed it off as nerves or isolation getting to me. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, what I felt. The air in that cabin had been too still, too aware, like whoever was outside knew exactly how to move without being caught. I've camped in the wilderness, stayed in sketchy motels, and slept in my truck during storms. But I've never felt fear like that night. In hindsight, I think Max sensed it long before I did. Dogs notice things we don't, the scent of someone nearby, the rhythm of movement, the unfamiliar quiet between sounds. When he froze at that window, maybe he saw something or someone watching from inside. Since then, I haven't booked another stay that remote. I stick to well-reviewed places, preferably with neighbors nearby. I even started bringing a small camera to set up near doors and windows, just in case. That trip taught me that isolation, while peaceful in theory, also strips away the safety net of other people. Out there, surrounded by woods and silence, it's just you, your instincts, and whatever else decides to share the dark with you. Whenever I think back to that cabin, I remember the second-floor loft vividly. The way the light fell through the window at sunset, the small corner where Max refused to approach, and the creak of unseen footsteps that carried through the floor. I'll never know for sure who was outside that night or how close they came, but I do know this. It wasn't the cabin I was afraid of. It was the person who might have been standing in the dark just a few feet away watching me sleep. Ever pulled up to a rental that looked perfect on the outside, only to feel a chill you could not explain? That's what happened to me in Florida. The unit itself seemed chic and normal, but one glance through a locked window revealed something so unsettling I could not stop thinking about it. Years ago, my husband and I stayed in a divided unit in Florida for a short vacation. The unit was designed almost like a large hotel room, with a back section converted for guests. It was cozy enough on the inside, with comfortable furniture and the usual amenities. At first glance, it seemed perfectly fine. The neighborhood was quiet, and the property had a small courtyard and a gated entrance. But something about the approach to the unit always left me uneasy. To reach our space, we had to park in a designated spot, pass through a small gate, and walk alongside a garage. The garage wasn't unusual in itself, but the walkway felt narrow and confining. I chalked my unease up to a mix of factors: my own medical issues that made me restless at night, the energy of our 22-year-old twins who were constantly moving or complaining, and the unfamiliarity of the area. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us as we walked past that garage, a sensation that made my skin crawl each evening. The first night was difficult. I tossed and turned, unable to settle into sleep, despite the softness of the bed. My husband and kids, naturally, slept right through it. I felt alert to every little sound, the creak of the ceiling fan, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional shuffle of a branch against the window. I told myself repeatedly that it was just the stress of travel, and perhaps the new environment amplifying my awareness. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to enjoy the rest of our stay, hoping the feeling would fade with familiarity. Over the next couple of days, things seemed relatively normal. The unit itself was clean and comfortable, with no noticeable issues except for sporadic Wi-Fi interruptions. The teenagers argued over meals, my husband worked on catching up with emails, and I tried to focus on the vacation rather than the nagging anxiety that wouldn't quite leave me. Everything about the space was functional. There were no odors, no insects inside our section, and no signs that anything was amiss. I reminded myself that I was probably being overly cautious and perhaps reading too much into nothing. It wasn't until we were preparing to leave that the memory of the uneasy feeling intensified. I was walking past the side of the garage, carrying some luggage to the car, when I noticed a locked door I hadn't paid much attention to before. Next to it was a large window, its glass darkened by the fading light. Out of curiosity, I peered inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. The room beyond the glass was completely dark, but hundreds of flies were crawling on the inside of the window and buzzing around the dim interior. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but as I watched, I realized the sheer number of them. The sight was shocking and surreal, unlike anything I had ever encountered. I stepped back instinctively, feeling uneasy and unsettled. My first thought was to tell my husband, or the Airbnb host, but a strange feeling of premonition held me back. The unit we had stayed in was entirely free of flies, smells, or any other warning signs. The issue seemed contained to that one locked room. The Wi-Fi had been spotty at times, but that seemed minor compared to the room full of flies. Nothing in our own space indicated a problem. I moved to the car without speaking to anyone about what I had seen. Part of me felt embarrassed, as though I might be overreacting or imagining things. Another part of me was simply distracted by the anticipation of leaving, eager to be home and back in a familiar environment. I told myself that it wasn't really my business, that perhaps it was a storage area or a maintenance room with a forgotten issue. I did not mention the site to the host when checking out, and I did not tell my family. No one asked, and no one seemed aware of what I had seen. Even though I tried to push the memory from my mind, it lingered. On the drive home, I kept replaying the image of hundreds of flies inside that dark, locked room. I wondered how long they had been there, how the room had gone unnoticed, and whether anyone else had ever seen it. The experience felt eerie and unsettling, leaving a strange weight on my chest that I could not shake. It was not fear in the traditional sense, but a discomfort that went beyond explanation. Looking back now, I regret not mentioning it to the host, or even asking questions. The encounter has stayed with me whenever I think about Airbnb stays. The house itself seemed ordinary, functional, and welcoming in every way, besides one thing. The dim room with a few flies was impossible to ignore. It made me wonder about all the spaces we pass by every day without notice, spaces that could be hiding something unsettling just out of sight. Even years later, the memory returns in flashes. I can picture the locked door, the dark room beyond it, and the flies crawling and buzzing against the glass. I still feel the same mixture of dread and curiosity, and I often imagine what it would have been like to go inside that room. The experience did not harm us directly, and our stay was otherwise uneventful, but it reminded me how fragile comfort can be, and how quickly normalcy can be pierced by the unexpected. To this day, I consider the Florida Airbnb stay a lesson in vigilance and observation. It reminded me that appearances can be deceiving, that a tidy and functional space might still hide something unsettling. I also learned that some moments are so strange and shocking that they are impossible to forget, even if they do not directly affect your life. It is a memory that has stayed with me, a small but indelible reminder of the unknown lurking just out of sight.